Our speaker for this session is David Krueger. David is an assistant professor at the University of Cambridge and a member of Cambridge's Computational and Biological Learning Lab and Machine Learning Group. His own research group focuses on deep learning and AI alignment. Could you please welcome David?
All right, thank you. Great to be here. So, yeah, I should just note my research group focuses on deep learning, AI alignment, and AI existential safety. And I always want to emphasize that last one because I think that's really what it's all about for the most part at the end of the day. So, hang on. Technical difficulties. This is probably due to me making my slides at the absolute last minute. And I'm used to using my own laptop here, but I think this will be working any moment. So I can see things here, but I guess they're not showing up for you guys. Anyway, so let me just talk a little bit. So yeah, I wanted to say some things about like what I think this community has got wrong. I'm not going to focus on the things I think the community has got right, which maybe are a lot, maybe more than other communities, maybe equal to some other communities. I don't know. Not really important to compare. But at the end of the day, I decided I didn't want to get too hung up on that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but I'm mostly just going to be talking about some things that I think are like important and maybe different ways of looking at things. Here we go. Great. Okay. So yeah, this is what I said in my abstract. Is I was going to talk about some of my reflections on how I think we should be addressing existential risk, mistakes I think the community has made, a bunch of other stuff about like threat model strategy, technical governance, etc. So here's the quick part about mistakes that were made. So basically, I think historically this community has approached AI safety and existential safety. I'm just going to call it safety sometimes, even though I think it's often good to distinguish those. But from what people would call like a techno-solutionist mindset. So this is the idea that this is a technical problem, and if we do like some good research, then we'll be able to like solve that technical problem, and that means that the problem will be solved and like go away, and it'll all be good. And I think like that has sort of corresponded to some extent to the second point here, which is giving up on governance and global coordination to a large extent. So we're going to revisit in a sec which one of these mistakes or which of these mistakes we might still be making. But I think historically, when I would talk to people about governance, almost everyone would be like, well, that's too hard. So we just have to solve the technical alignment problem, and we shouldn't even worry about thinking about global coordination. That's just too hard. At the same time, I guess moving on to the third point here, I think like historically this community has sort of been both very concerned about this issue, but also seemed to have this sort of implicit assumption that like if we play our cards right, things are going to turn out all right, or at least like we have a good shot of really influencing things. And in the early days, this actually meant things like MIRI planning to solve intelligence essentially, or figure out the fundamental principles of intelligence. They're like everyone else is doing AI wrong, and we're going to figure out the better way and leapfrog everyone, and also at the same time we'll figure out how to make it friendly or safe. But maybe more recently, it also has just meant like being more invested in sort of advancing this community, the EA community, and parts of AI safety that we view as like core parts of the AI safety community, or adjacent to us, or sort of like really aligned with the way we're viewing the problem and what we're doing, as opposed to trying to get everyone working on the problem, basically. And I think there's just so much more talent out in the world. This is a very small community, and so that's a mistake that I think we've made. A very specific example of that is not engaging with academia enough. So not just machine learning, right, but other areas of academia. So I think there's kind of this idea, and I still run into people a lot who are like, well, how can I contribute if in the old days it was like, how can I contribute if I'm not a super genius like those guys at MIRI? And then more recently it was like, well, how can I contribute if I'm not a good fit for like machine learning, or like maybe there's this governance stuff, and so maybe if you're like in poli-sci or econ or machine or CS, you can still do something, but if you're in another field, like good luck contributing. And I think really this is a problem that can be approached from all sorts of different disciplines, and we're seeing more and more people across all of academia being interested in AI has become more and more of a big deal. Allying with big tech over civil society. So I think So actually, I'm going to skip to my next slide where I say which ones are we still making, because it's going to make this faster and easier. I think most of them is the short answer. Maybe we've gotten a little bit better on some of these. So yeah, allying with big tech over civil society, I think people still have the attitude of they're the ones who are building it, so like we just need to make sure that they are doing the right things and are sort of on our side, and we have people there. And like this means, sort of, it's a very consequentialist way of looking at it, right? It's like these guys are building the stuff that might destroy the world, but we have to do this entryism thing where we go like work with them, work for them to try and like mitigate things a little bit, as opposed to just saying that's wrong, that's bad, nobody should be doing it, I'm not going to do it, I'm not going to be complicit. And like, all of these are things that, there are trade-offs, right? I'm not saying that nobody should be working at big tech companies, but it seems like overwhelmingly this community has taken the attitude of like, they're the more important allies to us than, let's say, civil society, which might include things like the fake community and machine learning, but it might also just include like trying to engage with people who, if they really understood what was happening in machine learning and believed it, would already have been up in arms a long time ago, maybe. Yeah. And at the same time, I guess, similar to this, I think we've had a similar attitude as a community towards the machine learning community, saying like, we need to win them over, and if we, come across as too sort of strident or aggressive or something, that's never going to happen. So we kind of need to be, doing only the good cop side of the good cop, bad cop equation, right? That's one that I certainly think is changing, right? So the bold ones are the ones that we're still making here. And then finally, sort of at a meta level, I think this whole community has experienced a lot of growing pains, and historically the way that funding works has been fairly nepotistic, which worked better when it was in fact a small community of people who were even interested in or aware of these funding sources and trying to get funding, because everyone maybe knew each other well enough. But I think it's just not scaling. And then I think another thing that's not scaling is our community epistemics. So I think a lot of people are sort of deferring to some nebulous sense of what the consensus in the community is. So, things like, oh, we shouldn't do like direct outreach, or we shouldn't even like be talking to, trying to convince machine learning people, maybe unless we're in machine learning. I mean, these might be really good ideas actually for most people, but the fact that I think most people are kind of not aware of like what the community as a whole thinks, and sort of being very willing to defer to experts or their impression of what experts, and I'm speaking for myself here as well. Like, I think this is something that I feel like I've sort of persistently made that kind of a mistake. So yeah, I guess just jumping back a little bit to the top ones here. So I do think that people are increasingly interested in governance. I'm really happy to see that. That's something I've been sort of pushing for a long time. On the other hand, maybe we're still kind of giving up on global coordination. Like, the governance has become focused on influencing DC and sort of maybe allying with the national security apparatus in the United States, and doing things that are definitely not cooperative with other countries like China, who might in fact be very relevant going forward. So yeah, that's my short summary of the actual title of the talk as advertised, basically. Yeah, so I do think, like, as I alluded to that at the beginning, it's kind of easy to critique ourselves, and it's popular recently because of some recent events, right? And so I don't want to get too hung up on that, but I did want to deliver a little bit of what was promised, and maybe this would be an interesting starting point for people's discussions or something. But what I'm going to talk about now is just some of the things that I think I end up repeating a lot when I talk to people in this community about this stuff that seem important to me. So it's this list of 8 things, basically. And I'm just going to go ahead and jump right into it. So this is sort of the outline for the rest of the talk. So this first one is something that I wrote about on Less Wrong, like, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago, and that was when it wasn't very popular, really, as a whole as a website. I feel like it never got much traction, but I kind of felt like, oh, I've put this idea out there. Seems like people are aware of it now. They must be, thinking about it and using it to inform their decisions. But I think I realize now, like, nobody is reading my 6-year-old less wrong post, right? So I need to to talk about it at a talk like this. I claim that the picture looks a lot like this for a lot of systems and a lot of alignment techniques. So what am I showing here? So existential safety on the y-axis, that's the thing we care about. And there's sort of this implicit assumption that if we're doing alignment work, aligning a particular system or figuring out how to align our systems, then as they get more aligned, they'll get safer. But actually, I think what happens is that first, existential safety goes down, because what happens? They get safe enough to deploy. They get safe enough that you as an individual actor or a company want to deploy the system because you can make a bunch of money off of it. And the bar for doing that is like a lot lower than the bar that we would like from a collective point of view, right? So an analogy I like to use is if you give everyone a button that they can push and it gives them $1 million and has a 1 in a million chance of destroying the world, a lot of people want to push that button, right? And we'll get that button before we get the one that gives you $1 million and has like a 1 in a trillion chance of destroying the world, which is like, I don't know, maybe something that we actually want to exist. I'm not going to say trillion is the right number, but you get the picture. So, and maybe at the end, after 4 or more dots, we come out the other end and the thing is actually safe enough, like I mentioned, the second box, that it's actually a good thing to exist, and we're actually happy when people deploy it. So, the basic problem here is that existential safety is a common good, and so we expect these to be undersupplied. So how does this play out in practice? Well, we have different technologies, and we can think about what happens when we push them forward in terms of the alignment of these different technologies. And I claim, what? Whoop? Yeah. Okay, this is coming back to the safe versus trustworthy part. So I claim that a lot of safety or alignment research is sort of doing this. It's sort of pushing forward all of the different technologies that we could build based on AI, or all the different things that we might want to do somewhat simultaneously, right? So think about, I don't know, like large language models, GPT-4. And that means that they all go into the ditch of danger, and then maybe eventually they come out the other end. What would be an alternative, more promising way of doing this, if we could, would be to focus on making systems so reliable and robust and trustworthy that they come out the other end, and sort of pushing them one by one through this ditch as quickly as possible. So I kind of wanted to connect this to this idea of trustworthy AI, where there's a difference between something being safe and us actually having a good reason to trust it, to understand that it is safe. And I think if we don't have that understanding, then we shouldn't be deploying things. But I won't dwell on that too much because I want to talk about some other things. Yeah, so solving alignment is another phrase that has been rubbing me the wrong way recently. And I think, sure, maybe there is this technical problem that we can solve. Seems more like we get incrementally closer and closer to solving it. So I think if we talk about solving alignment, then people will say things like, well, if we solve alignment, then things will go well, then things will be okay. And I think actually for any level of solution that is, not perfect, we will still be facing these trade-offs between safety and performance, or maybe in modern terms, alignment and capabilities. I think you get what I'm talking about. And we will have incentives to deploy systems that are maybe more autonomous and less well understood and less safe in various senses in order to get more performance, leading to this race to the bottom dynamic. So things that are probably not going to change in terms of these safety performance trade-offs are things like, it will probably always be safer if we have a way of unplugging the systems and keeping a human in the loop, and if we do more testing. And I think those things aren't really going to go away just because we have better alignment techniques. So in general, I think this is kind of the heart of the problem to a large extent, is this collective action problem, like I've been alluding to, and sort of the fact that there's always this sort of a trade-off that we have to worry about. And technical research maybe helps in terms of this picture, but I'm not sure how much it actually helps when you think about this ditch of danger thing as well. So another thing that comes out of this, I think, is that we shouldn't be thinking about this in terms of accidents and misuse, which also I hear a lot. And instead, we should be thinking maybe more about structural risk, or about things that are sort of in somewhere between accident and misuse. So basically, in the law, there are things that are essentially accidents, considered accidents and misuse. And if something is an accident, you only are responsible if you're under, if you have strict liability. So that means that even if you really didn't see it coming, had no reason to see it coming, you're still responsible and you can still be penalized. And then misuse corresponds to these things where it's like you actually had the intention of doing that thing, of causing that effect, whether because you intrinsically value it or because it's something that was part of your plan to get something else you intrinsically valued. So I think those are like the things that are very clearly like accident and misuse. But in between, we have this giant gray area of recklessness and negligence. And I think this is where the large majority of the risk lies, is in people taking risks that they shouldn't be, which is recklessness, or in people not even being aware of the risks, which is, even though they should be, which is negligence. So like right now, right, I think my personal view is that we have developed a lot of reasons to take existential risk seriously, and a lot of people are being negligent because they're not educating themselves about those risks, right? At the same time, you might have other actors who are aware of these risks but are deciding to deploy systems anyways. So they might be being reckless, right? I don't see many examples that look like purely accidents or misuse, right? So maybe there's like Chaos GPT, where somebody asked GPT or AutoGPT to destroy humanity or something like this. Maybe that's misuse, but I really think that they actually just don't think it has the capabilities, and so it's more of a joke. So if it did happen to destroy humanity, which not something I'm worried about, just to be clear, I guess that would have been maybe negligence, maybe accident, I don't know. So, and yeah, there's another slide here that I wanted to show you. I guess just, this is just the actual, flow chart that is from, so this is slides that I took from my former postdoc, Henry Ashton, who has a legal background and so knows about this stuff. Yeah, great. Next point. So I think there's a lot more that I'd like to say about threat models, but it's still a little bit half-baked, and it's still really hard to communicate everything that I want to about how I think existential risk, is likely to play out. So I think, first of all, it's very hard to predict, right? So there are lots of different threat models, and I think even the sort of fast takeoff ones are definitely worth taking seriously. But I think a lot of people, maybe even some people in this community, think that like things are a lot better if you don't have like fast takeoff, if you have a couple years or something. And I'm pretty skeptical of that. I think, it seems better, but probably not that much better. And the reason is, I guess, okay, I'll back up and tell you a little bit about my personal history. How am I doing for time? Do I have so I see this timer, but I guess I've got like 10, 15 minutes, something like that. I think that'll be fine. Yeah, so before I heard about deep learning, I did not think that we would have AGI in my lifetime. So I was like, yeah, it seems like it's about 100 years or more off. And I heard about deep learning in like 2012 from Jeff Hinton's Coursera course. And that changed my mind about this. But before that, I was like, yeah, in this camp that maybe a significant number of people still are, of like, that just seems really far off. But I was still worried, right? So I was both worried about, well, it seems like it's going to be really hard to prevent AI systems from becoming smarter than people. But it also seemed like thinking about it the way that the AI safety community was at that time, if it was 100 years off, did seem misguided to me. And the reason was I thought, we're going to see AI sort of diffuse throughout society in a variety of ways before we get AGI. We're going to see, powerful narrow AI systems being deployed all over the place in ways that are very, let's say, coercive and sort of concentrate power and maybe, if not coercive, manipulative. And just generally speaking, the trend here is like AI is, even narrow AI, right, is something that becomes very powerful at scale. And so powerful at scale that it might be sufficient to really destroy our existing social institutions and make things worse in a variety of ways. So the basic picture is like, even narrow AI can be used to disempower people. So this is something that I have to admit I'm not like personally an expert on. I'm not following this stuff as closely as I would like to, but I thought I would just give like one example that I found on the internet without having done too much research. So let's just take this, as a maybe hypothetical example that is reported on in here, and maybe somebody else knows more about it or wants to dig into it and see how good this specific example is. But I think I hear about things like this fairly regularly. So the idea here is that AI is being used to deny people medical coverage that they are sort of entitled to according to what the government is saying you have the right to. And the particular story here is basically you have these systems that say, well, according to our predictions, you're supposed to be better in 17 days. So by default, insurance is going to pay for those 17 days and then cut you off, and then you have to take the insurance company to court, essentially, if you want to get paid for the rest of your recovery period. And the way this is pitched is like, well, this is just, sort of a prediction or a suggestion. This isn't like a hard and fast rule. But the way it operates in practice is, it's really efficient if we operate by this rule and try and push all of the cost of people who don't follow this rule onto those people. And that's what it sounds like is happening or happened in this case here. And so, you have people who are on their deathbed, essentially, and to actually go through the process, to have the recourse that you would expect to have, that you're sort of legally entitled to challenge this system, could take years, right? So people don't survive to go through that process, and they just get screwed over by the insurance company. And you might say, like, well, yeah, okay, I don't know, this just seems like business as usual. That's kind of exactly my point. I mean, I think this is business as usual, but as we deploy more and more of these systems more broadly, we're going to see more and more effects like this. And I guess, at the end of the day, I think AI is something that sort of allows you to translate money and capital and economic power as a supplement for labor, right? So this means that people's labor becomes devalued, people get economically disempowered, and if you just sort of extrapolate that wildly, you end up in a situation where people have no economic power, and then I think that also means that we are likely to lose our political power, because we also see that AI is able to translate economic power into political power as well, right? So you're able to, if you have a lot of money, you can run a better campaign, you can do a better job of modeling people and predicting how you can influence them, et cetera. Yeah, and I guess there's this quote about the Holocaust from somebody who is maybe not a great guy and somewhat complicit in it, but at least at some point he realized that he had made a mistake. And so just this idea of like, well, other people are being harmed by AI right now, but maybe we should not worry about that, I think is also a mistake, and we should have more people here who are engaged with what's going wrong right now with AI and sort of trying to fight every place in which we're seeing AI being used to disempower people. Cool. So AI, I think AI is basically the first step, right? Or I've been telling people recently, I think AI and artificial life are going to happen around the same time, like AGI specifically. So I think when we think about AI as like a single system or a few systems in the control of some powerful entities, I think this is not the way it's going to play out. So I think what's going to actually happen is we're going to create something like a primordial soup of AI technologies and things that can enable more powerful AI technologies and can enable things like deploying AI systems in various ways that give them more autonomy and interact with the real world. And maybe here's some examples of things that might fit into this category, like blockchain technology, GitHub, torrenting, 3D printing, whatever, GPT-4 and all the plugins. And all these things are going to exist, and they're going to be sort of floating around there, being patched together in different ways by people and even by AI systems. And out of that, we're going to see things like, AutoGPT and ChaosGPT, and maybe actually even killer robots. They probably won't look like that, but the idea that we're going to, that we should be thinking about just these systems that sort of are in a certain place or under some control of somebody, as opposed to just this soup of all sorts of things being combined in various ways in a way that looks, more like natural selection and more random. I think this is what we should really be imagining happening. And this one's a little bit out of place, but I guess I want to say, you know, just emphasize that I think the problem is still like less, like right now we're still in this place of like coordinated action could stop these kinds of problems. And at some point, we might just spill over into the place where coordinated action can't stop them. And we don't really know where that line is, but we should sort of expect to be moving more and more in that direction. And I think like it's not really clear that being in sort of out of control one stage is that much better. So like that's kind of like where we're at with climate change maybe, where we could stop it, but we're sort of not really actually using that power that coordinated humanity has in principle. Yeah, so I think, you know, I think a lot of people view it this way, and you know, there's obviously a third option, right? Which is that we get lucky and this picture is wrong, or maybe we get lucky in the sense of like we just try to align systems somehow and it just works. So I don't think very many people are thinking that like, yeah, we're actually going to solve it in a way that we have, you know, the kind of trustworthiness that I was sort of alluding to earlier, where we really know what we're doing. It's more like, you know, maybe we're going to get lucky. And you know, if you think, well, okay, we really need to do like governance and control the technology, then I think it's sort of natural for people to be like, well, what you're talking about is going to be really dystopian, surveillance, police state, whatever. And I mean, let me just say, I think there's like something to that, right? Like if you think hard about like the situation where, let's say, anyone can, you know, write the wrong code on their computer and that destroys the world, it's like how would you actually stop that from happening, right? But I think like this is missing what is maybe the most promising way forward, which is regulating compute and the development of large models. And this is something that a lot of people are talking about recently, but I think when they're talking about compute, they're really talking more about development or even deployment. So what they're saying is like, let's know where the compute is so that we can do things like run tests before people deploy their system and they won't deploy it if those tests fail. And I think that's not really what we should be thinking about in terms of regulating compute. I mean, okay, never mind. It's great to think about that, think about everything, but what seems more promising is to regulate even further up the stack. So basically, the further up the stack you get, I think the more robust of a solution you get. So once you have something deployed, if you're like, okay, we have to make sure nobody misuses that, that's when like the surveillance state thing starts to seem like, well, yeah, I don't know how you're going to stop people from misusing this technology. If any random person, you know, can suddenly launch a killer AI that kills everyone, you know, what are we going to do about that? Well, maybe that means I'm out of time. I saw 5 minutes, I think, 2 or 3 minutes ago. Well, I can still read my slides, so great, there we go. Yeah, so I think like actually, you know, we should be thinking more further up the stack. That's the main point here. So just like one vision for how this might look in the long run is that we have, you know, a global consortium that is actually sort of controlling the supply chain of advanced compute and maybe controlling also, you know, the compute when it actually gets produced. Lots of things to think about, discuss there. I won't go into too much detail. So finally, I am a technical researcher, even though like these days, I'm much more interested in this stuff because I think we're at sort of an unprecedented period where more people are very rapidly getting interested in this. But I'll tell you a little bit about, you know, what you might do in terms of technical research from my point of view. I think there's like 3 different things that you can aim to do with technical work, and basically everybody is trying to develop better safety techniques, and that's the first thing. But I think these other 2 are like roughly equally as important, and that's helping motivate AI governance by basically showing that there is in fact a compelling need to regulate certain kinds of systems. And that can look like, you know, clarifying the threat models and the stories that we tell about why these things are dangerous, giving theoretical results that support those, and maybe also giving, you know, scary demos or empirical results that support those. And then finally, if you have the desire for some sort of AI governance, we still have to figure out how it's actually going to be implemented. And this is not a purely technical problem, but there are technical problems here that you can look at, which have to do with like maybe security and privacy and things like that. But I think the question I've been asking myself recently, as I pivot to maybe trying to have technical work that is more oriented towards these governance problems, these last two problems, is, if I had all the access I wanted to an AI developer and everything they were doing, and I could interview people, I could run whatever tests, I could see the models at every stage in development, what would I be asking? What are the questions that I would be asking? And so I think this is like a really fruitful question to be asking yourself if you want to do technical research to help support existential safety. Cool. I think you can read what's on the slide, probably already have, so these are all important, but different strategies. So just to recap, I said I think there are all these mistakes that have been made, or at least, it's all like sort of relative thing. Maybe we've been too much in this direction for a lot of these, so I don't want to frame this as like binary or anything. And I told you about all these things which are maybe sort of related to those mistakes in a way that I won't really have time to get into, but you probably can appreciate that some yourself already. Yeah, thanks for listening, and I wish I had more time to talk to people. I'm kind of like pretty much booked solid at the EAG, I think. So, but there will be office hours afterwards at least. So that's hope to talk to some of you guys then.
Cool. We've got time for about, I think, 20 minutes of questions now before
Great.
office hours. So thanks so much for the talk. I guess trying to get a bit more concrete then, if you had someone who was about to, wanted to start doing AI technical work, does some of these kind of, the things that you've said about the mistakes that people have made in the past, sort of what direction does this push in for like what advice you might give them? Like for example, does it sort of suggest more that they should be like going for a PhD route and like going for working within academia, publishing at peer-reviewed journals, presenting at conferences rather than going to work in AI labs or by themselves independently? Like that's the kind of thing I'm wondering about.
Yeah, definitely like publishing. I think like in top tier ML venues, that's an important one that I've talked about in the past. I think that one just seems like kind of a no-brainer to me, but I have like an answer to this question that's a little bit more big picture, I guess, which is I think just thinking, considering a much broader range of options. Mm-hmm. So including things like getting more involved in trying to understand and address existing harms of AI systems or existing risks. Like become a domain expert in some area, like criminal justice or like healthcare or these sorts of things, and understand what's happening there, talk to the people there, and I think that's both going to increase sort of the network of people who understand and care about existential safety, but it also gives us a better chance to have like warning shots of like, hey, this is a place where like AI is actually being deployed really irresponsibly right now, and here's both like how that could go wrong and reach a catastrophic level, but maybe also like this is a place where we can use this as inspiration to push back and design better regulation. Yeah, and then the other thing I think is like what I had on sort of one of those last slides, which is like, don't just think about solving the technical problem, think about how you can contribute to governance, and really, yeah, it's not like there's technical work in governance. There's, I think, the best technical work right now and the most neglected technical work is the stuff that is going to help us do better governance. One more thing on that, I guess, is just like in the past year, I've been giving lots of talks with lots of different framings. One that I thought about including here but didn't is like makers versus breakers. So I think most people in alignment are sort of trying to construct a solution to the problem, but I think it's neglected to show like why different solutions don't look promising and how they fail. I think that fits into the second category of creating motivation for governance, because as long as people can point at something and be like, look, they're fixing the problem, they're doing alignment, the thing is aligned, you have to be able to say, no, that's insufficient, here's why, and be like compelling and convincing about that. Yeah.
Cool, okay. So to dive into maybe like one of those things in a bit more detail, taking the idea of going and becoming like a criminal justice expert, looking at like narrow AI being applied in like being deployed in like particular situations.
Yeah.
Is the idea here that the sort of there are technical solutions to make the AI less biased or just like fairer, that are actually going to be similar technical solutions that will scale to preventing existential catastrophe? Or is it more about getting people on side with the idea that AI could be dangerous? Or is it more about building coalitions? I'm like curious about what the sort of like route to this being like a valuable thing to do feels like to you.
Yeah. Like certainly some of all of those maybe. I think the first one, I wouldn't have put it that way because I think it's not just about like fairness and bias, even though those are going to be important in criminal justice. I think it's maybe more about just having an actual like grounded understanding of non-technical aspects of the problem that can really inform the technical work you do. So this is, this is advice that I so far haven't really taken myself. So grain of salt there, I guess. I'm hoping more people in the community will do it, and it's something I am considering trying to branch out to do more of that. But it's sort of competing with a lot of different things right now for me, including just things that don't look like technical research at all. They're just in that outreach, advocacy, activism, governance category. Yeah, I think maybe I have more to say about that. So I do think it's also, it's more in line with this picture of like pushing one technology all the way out the other end of the ditch. And I think like getting practice with that would give you a good sense of sort of how to approach it for other technologies. And also, I think you can sort of maybe just speak much more credibly about like what responsible AI actually looks like. And that seems useful in a variety of contexts. Yeah.
This idea of pushing one technology through the ditch one by one,
Yeah.
so is the idea that we get like image classifiers to be like good and safe and like usable, steerable, like, and those are like through the ditch? Is that the kind of level of like detail that we're talking about, or is it more like, am I thinking like too narrow here?
I think maybe even more narrow, like, but yeah, that's a good example. So this is all stuff that is pretty, like, that I'm just thinking a lot about recently. Some of this is, I guess, very fully baked, but some of the stuff in the talk is very half-baked. This is more in the half-baked category. When I've been talking to people recently at machine learning conferences about, pausing AI, first of all, you have to be very clear about, like, this distinction between like research and development and deployment and all these things, because people by default just think you mean stop everything right now.
And so just to clarify, which bit are you most interested in pausing?
I think I'm most interested in pausing development and deployment, those two. Yeah, I think in terms of research though, which is what I was getting to, I do think we're at a stage where like people shouldn't be working on making AI smarter. They should be working on like how to understand and control it better, or applying it to specific problems in a responsible way. And I think like that is what I have in mind with like pushing it through the ditch, basically, is like saying, here's a problem that like I think we can build an AI tool to solve this specific problem. And it might be something like pretty broad, like image classification and translation, but it might be something pretty narrow, like, I don't know, what's a good example? Just like maybe figuring out where there's garbage showing up in the water system for this state or something like that. Yeah, and so I think there's a lot of opportunity for stuff like that. A lot of people seem to be, in the machine learning community, seem to want there to be more work like that and want to be working on that stuff in principle. So I think it's important to say like, yeah, that's good stuff to be doing. Yeah.
And the idea here is that you are, in fact, when you say like you want people not to be working on making the AI smarter, and this is like the broad ML community in general.
Yeah, like everyone. Yeah, okay. I just don't think it's like a reasonable thing for people to be working on right now, for the most part. Of course, it's a very fuzzy line, right? So it's not quite actionable to just say that, but I think that's the norm that I would like us to have. Yeah.
And then this kind of getting one technology like through the ditch, this is happening. It sounds like that might not take like all of the AI X-risk community's efforts to get like the sort of garbage collection thing like sorted and through the ditch, or maybe I'm underestimating the challenge here. But it sort of seems like maybe some of these things could be happening simultaneously.
Definitely, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's sort of a mindset thing. It's like, yeah. So another like way of looking at this that's more sort of abstract and technical is saying. Suppose we want to improve like the reliability or the robustness of our system, so like it makes fewer mistakes, right? One way we could go about doing that is just say, like, let's look at the average performance and try and drive the average performance up. Another thing we could do is say, let's try and identify larger and larger regions where it does not make any mistakes in the input space. And I think that second one is analogous to pushing the technology through the ditch, because you're now saying, in this, in this region of space, I can trust this model, as opposed to like, everywhere it's pretty good, but like we don't really know if it's going to make a mistake in a particular region. And so, there's like work on that is like formal verification of like mostly with LP norm, perturbation, adversarial example stuff. So it's not necessarily the most practical for all the things that we want to do with the technology. But yeah, I'm kind of a little bit opposed to this mentality of somebody's going to do it anyways, so let's just try and make it safer, which I think has been pretty popular. And I think it's maybe more appealing to me right now to think about what would actually, a responsible way of doing things be, and like, let's push on that.
Could you clarify a bit of the difference between those two different mindsets a little bit more? They seem like superficially somewhat similar to me.
Yeah, let's see. So I mean, I think, so there's one thing which is sort of like the technical question of like, am I trying to make things in general safer on the margin versus like, am I trying to make some particular thing safe enough that it's like reached an acceptable level of safety? And then I sort of conflated that with something that's pretty similar, which is basically your willingness to think about these replaceability arguments of like, if I don't do it, somebody else will, so it's better if I'm here making it epsilon safer rather than them there making it epsilon more dangerous. Yeah, and I think like that's more associated with the like making everything a bit safer on the margin approach. Yeah.
That makes sense. I'm not going to ask you to explain the technical bit that you talked about in the previous answer, but if people want to ask it maybe at the office hours, that would be good. Okay, so then I guess when you're, if people are sort of engaging much more with the sort of narrow AI deployments and the harms in the real world, there is this question of sort of interacting with other communities who are working on AI and how they're thinking about dangers from AI. I'm curious if you have thoughts a bit more about like the AI ethics community, or just like how the wider public is thinking about AI risks at the moment, and yeah, if you have thoughts about how people who are concerned about AI existential safety should be like orienting towards interacting with these groups.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I have some collaborators who are like in the AI ethics community or somewhat more, associated with that community, and I know there's some people who are sort of, trying to bridge that gap and somewhere in between the communities. I think people like that are super valuable because we've seen that there's sometimes a lot of animosity, especially online, between members of these communities. I personally am like, historically have not been that involved with that community, but I am going to one of the conferences this year and really looking forward to like meeting people and getting the vibes. And I think, maybe all I would say for now is like, until I do that or sort of meet and talk to more people from the community, I don't feel like I want to, render any sort of judgment or impression on them, because I think whatever you see online is never going to give you a good picture of what people are actually like. And what else was there? Oh yeah, and in terms of the public, I think I guess just, yeah, maybe say a little bit more about the Fader ethics community. I mean, I think there's definitely, got to, like, people there doing good work and who know a lot more about a lot of things that are important than a lot of people in this community. So I think there's definitely like a deep level of like knowledge and expertise that we are probably lacking if we want to do some of the stuff I was talking about, that we can get best by engaging with people there, in a sort of respectful and cooperative way. In terms of the public, I think, yeah, also trying to get more of a vibe check. I've, historically when I talk to people, like cab drivers or Uber drivers or just whoever, about AI safety, or like my friends, who aren't in the field, childhood friends and stuff, they seem like much more to just like get it, or at least be sympathetic to like, whoa, AI is like sketchy and dangerous and like, so it seems like there's a lot more of that attitude now. I don't know if that's, I think that's good and probably fine. I don't know if it's like what we need or how to, like, how much we should be trying to like just channel that sort of political will for taking AI seriously and doing stuff about it versus being more cautious. So I think there's been a little bit of people being a little bit fast and loose with some of their claims and the public comm stuff. I guess I think I don't have a super clear opinion about how to operate there, but I guess it seems good if lots of people are talking about the issue in general. I think historically people haven't expressed their views as much as they should, and including to the public. I think there's part of the question about how to be interfacing with the public on it and stuff like this. Yeah. I think I generally have the outlook of trying to just educate and inform people and learn things and not be too strategic about it, and yeah, be pretty straightforward.
And does it sound like you've been doing more of that yourself lately?
Somewhat, yeah, and still not as much as I'd like to. Yeah, and even historically, I was doing this in a sort of maybe disorganized way as a PhD student and stuff, just taking opportunities to give talks to non-technical audiences when they came up, stuff like that. Yeah, I think there's a lot of ignorance, both in the public and in the machine learning community about what this is all about, what this community thinks about, what we worry about. So, yeah, seems like it would be good to just give people an accurate picture, warts and all. Yeah.
And yeah, I guess another group that might be relevant are kind of government and decision makers or policy makers, and I guess that they're also paying more attention. More recently, there was a recent Senate hearing. I don't know if you had any other thoughts about that particular group?
Yeah. I guess it's pretty similar. I mostly just want people to really understand and care about the problem, and then I think they're going to have a better sense of what to do with that knowledge than I am, based on their position and the options that are available to them. I do worry that, that people are still maybe pretty ignorant and don't get it, but it does seem like that's changing quickly. And I think my impression is that it's a really hard problem, and we need to do some pretty things that might look pretty extreme in terms of regulating compute and stuff like that, compared to what I think people's first reaction or sort of hope will be about how we can solve the problem. I think it's going to take a big globally coordinated effort that is going to be maybe fairly unprecedented. I don't think that it's impossible. I think we can do it, but I think in order for things to work out, we need a very high level of understanding sort of throughout society. Yeah.
Yep, that makes sense. Okay, so to pivot to talking a bit more about technical safety agendas, I know that was one sub-bullet, was sort of all other research agendas go here.
Yeah.
But I guess if you have some thoughts on, are there particular research agendas or research approaches that you're optimistic about right now, whether at major AI labs or sort of in academia or independently? The question specifically has been, are there any sort of research that you think has a chance of improving existential safety if researched enough before deployment?
Yeah, I think I'm a fan of what's been called the portfolio approach. I think most people are doing reasonable things, modulo some of these maybe strategic considerations, the ditch of danger thing. So I think just in terms of solving the technical problems, the things people are working on mostly seem fairly reasonable to me. I guess I do think people tend to be pretty over-optimistic about whatever agenda they are most invested in, which is maybe a good way to motivate yourself or something. But it does mean maybe that people still focus too much on existing agendas and focus too much on trying to solve these technical problems and less on governance and technical work that could support governance, and just sort of thinking outside the box and sort of sitting with the problem and trying to figure out what it would actually take to solve it. Specific directions that I'm kind of excited about. I mean, I am finding it hard to be as excited about research recently because it feels like there's so much more happening in terms of like spreading awareness. That seems more valuable to me right now. But there's a couple things that we have been working on that fall into the general category of like science of deep learning, and more specifically, I think, about understanding when and how neural networks learn different things. So this is pretty related to mechanistic interpretability, or like similar in spirit, but is more focused on like understanding the learning process rather than the final model, and is more, at least in my mind, more focused on sort of understanding sort of high-level scientific principles underlying the learning, rather than, you know, like the dream is, you know, you sort of automatically push a button and it tells you, oh, here's exactly when I learned like this thing, or like here are all the interesting like patterns that happen throughout learning. But I think, you know, to get started, we should just try and have a better understanding of like really some more basic stuff about how learning works. And
is the idea that this could be then like a feedback loop to sort of improve the way that training happens in the future, to make sure that models are like learning the right kind of things?
Potentially, yeah. I mean, I think it's broadly useful for a lot of things. Like maybe one of the most valuable things would be to sort of figure out when it's starting to learn something bad or dangerous, or figure out sort of if there's something like, you know, scaling laws for when that will happen. So if you can understand the learning behavior on some particular subset of examples that you care about, that might be like, you know, where it's doing bad stuff, and then you can see, oh, when I changed like this model, that happens later than this one. Why is that happening? And if you understand why is that happening, then you can probably do a lot to change whether or not it's happening. Is sort of the idea. Another line of research I wanted to mention is just understanding, I guess I'm calling it like emergent agency. So, you know, when you don't set out to build an agent, but you end up with one, what are all the ways that that can happen? How likely are they to happen? So like 3 specific things off the bat are like, there's sort of these decision theoretic arguments for cooperating with copies of yourself. So that would maybe include copies of yourself in the future, which means that even if you were just thinking about how to do a good job predicting the next token, if you were being cooperative with your future self, you might sacrifice performance on the current token in order to get things more predictable in the future, and thus, you know, try to influence the data you see in the future and influence the state of the world, which is not something that naively you expect a prediction algorithm to be doing.
So that might be a way that a prediction algorithm might start to behave in a more agentic way.
Yeah, exactly. Then you can also say, like, what if we're predicting the actions of an agent? Then if we do a good job of doing that, then of course this thing itself should be like an agent. But you can sort of ask what happens if the actions that we're predicting are not from like a proper agent, but they're from like a kind of noisy imperfect one, or questions like that. What if we see a different input than that agent did? And so imitation learning in general seems like it should give you an agent, but there's a lot of like sort of details there that seem worth working out. And then the last one, which is the most ill-formed for me anyways, is the idea that you could have multiple systems interacting that sort of spontaneously combine to form an agent. And I think that's like pretty underexplored, but seems like something that we should at least be looking into whether that might happen, because we're going to have a bunch of AI systems out there interacting with each other. Yeah.
Okay. And then I guess I'd be interested to hear some examples of what kinds of research lines might be the kind of research that informs AI governance stuff. So what kinds of questions do you think technical researchers should be looking into that will then, give more information for people looking at governance policy?
Yeah. So I mentioned like the two ways you can support governance, which is like motivating it and showing like how to actually do it, how to implement it. I haven't thought about the implementation one very much at all. It's something that really only occurred to me a couple months ago. The motivating it one, I think this comes back to like things like the maker versus breaker things, like showing why different alignment approaches aren't safe or seem like they might not work. The stuff about emergent agency is like one specific version of that. So you might have people being like, well, it's just all it's doing is predicting text, it's not an agent. And then you can be like, well, actually, here's a reason why something that's doing that can turn into an agent. So now those systems need to be scrutinized as well.
So this is all in the category of like providing the information to the people who are working on governance about why this might be dangerous and which specific versions of the thing might be dangerous.
Yeah.
Do you think we sort of don't have enough information in that at the moment?
I don't think we have enough rigorous information about that, certainly. And I think even not rigorous, I mean, this question of the emergent agency thing, I think versions of that people have very different intuitions about in the community, so that seems really worth resolving just for our own sake. But I was talking to a couple people recently about their technical research and how they hoped it to influence governance. And it was interesting because it was really basic stuff. It was like an example I think was, we want to show that pollution is a problem in our city. So we're monitoring pollution levels on vehicles as they drive around. And it's kind of obvious that the air quality was bad there. But they were if we want the government to actually do something, we need to come to them with a report with numbers that say look, here's how bad it is. And here's, if you spent this much money, it would be better, and then you would actually end up saving this much money because, of the costs that are being borne by having this pollution. And so that's maybe gave me an appreciation of the level of, solidness of that you need in order to get people to actually do stuff sometimes.
Fantastic. Okay, on that note, I guess I'll call this Q&A to a close, but David is about to do office hours directly after this, which I think was only recently added to Swapcard, so if you didn't think that you could go to that, you can, and it will be just next door for office hours. Thank you so much, David.
Thank you.